I never imagined I'd be sitting in my lawyer's office, staring at bank statements showing zero balances while my husband was halfway across the country with his executive assistant. No wife ever does. Yet there I was, holding paperwork that proved Ryan had drained our twin daughters' college trust funds. Every penny of the $347,000 we'd carefully saved over 12 years, gone. Their future security vanished with a few mouse clicks and transfer authorizations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My hands trembled as I clutched my phone, rereading the text from Meredith, Ryan's own cousin. Jen, I'm so sorry. I just saw Ryan and Vanessa at the Four Seasons in Chicago. They're not hiding it. I thought you should... No. Attached was a photo of my husband of 15 years, with his hand resting possessively on Vanessa's lower back, both laughing at some private joke while champagne glasses sparkled on the table between them. The conference room felt suddenly airless, the cream-colored walls closing in as my lawyer, Diana Winters, continued explaining the gravity of the situation. Jennifer, the trust accounts were joint signatories, which unfortunately means he had legal access. But draining them completely, especially given their designated purpose as education funds for your children, gives us grounds to pursue this. Aggressively, Diana said, her voice steady and reassuring amid my crumbling world. I stared at the Boston skyline through the office window, watching rain streak the glass like tears. How had I missed this? How had the man who'd helped me tuck our daughters into bed just 3 nights ago, kissing their foreheads and promising to help with their science projects when he returned from his industry conference, betrayed us so completely? I met Ryan Calloway during my final year at Boston University when I was pursuing my MBA, and he was already working at his family's investment firm, Calloway Financial. He was charismatic, ambitious, and seemed genuinely interested in my ideas about sustainable business practices. Within a year, we were married, and I had put my own career aspirations on hold to support his rise within the family company. His father, Gerald Calloway, had built the business from nothing into a respected regional financial services firm, and Ryan was the crown prince, the heir apparent. When I became pregnant with the twins Emma and Lily, Ryan seemed thrilled. He converted the spare bedroom into a nursery himself, painting clouds on the ceiling and assembling cribs on weekends. Our girls will never want for anything, he'd promised, setting up their college trust funds the week after they were born. Dad always says we invest in our future, and they're our future. For 12 years, that future seemed secure. Ryan rose to become Chief Operating Officer at Calloway Financial. I managed our home, volunteered on charity boards, and raised our daughters, often alone as Ryan's work hours extended and business trips multiplied. The twins were now in 7th grade, Emma the science enthusiast with her collection of rocks and minerals, Lily the budding artist who filled sketchbooks with intricate drawings, both intelligent, kind girls who deserved every opportunity their father had promised them. Jennifer? Diana's voice pulled me back to the devastating present. There's something else you should see. She slid another document across the polished table. It was a mortgage statement for a lakefront property in Michigan I'd never seen before, purchased 6 months ago with Ryan listed as the sole owner. The down payment exactly matched a $175,000 transfer from our home equity line of credit. He's been planning this, I whispered, the reality crashing down on me. This wasn't impulsive. No, Diana agreed, her expression grim. Based on these financial records, I'd say Ryan has been systematically moving assets for at least 8 months. The timing coincides with Vanessa Parker's hiring as his executive assistant. My stomach lurched. 8 months. While I was chairing the winter fundraiser for the girls' school, volunteering at their science fair, and managing our family's life, Ryan had been methodically preparing his exit, not just from our marriage, but from his financial responsibilities to our children. My phone buzzed with an incoming call, the twins' school. With shaking hands, I answered to hear the school nurse explaining that Emma had become suddenly ill with a high fever. Within minutes, I was gathering my documents, scheduling another appointment with Diana, and rushing to my daughter's side. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. While Ryan emptied our children's future, I was still the one showing up for their present. Emma's fever turned out to be the beginning of a serious case of pneumonia that required hospitalization. For 3 days, I barely left her side, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair while Lily stayed with my sister, Kara. I called Ryan repeatedly, voicemail every time. I texted updates about Emma's condition, no response. His silence was as complete as the zero balances in our accounts. On the second night of Emma's hospital stay, while she finally slept peacefully, thanks to powerful antibiotics, my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. Mrs. Calloway? This is Timothy Grant from Lakeside Realty in Harbor Springs, Michigan. Just confirming the closing documents are ready for Mr. Calloway and Ms. Parker's lakefront property purchase. They mentioned you might be handling some of the wire transfers. Since they're traveling, please call me at your convenience. I stared at the message, pieces clicking into place. Ryan hadn't just taken our daughter's education money. He was using it to build a new life with Vanessa in a lakeside paradise, complete with a multi-million-dollar property purchased with our children's future. Rage replaced shock, crystallizing into something cold and clear. The woman who had spent 15 years supporting Ryan's career, managing his home, raising his children, and believing his lies no longer existed. In her place stood someone new, someone who would fight with every resource available to protect her daughters. While Emma slept, I made 3 calls. The first was to Gerald Calloway, Ryan's father and the founder of Calloway Financial. Though semi-retired, Gerald still held controlling interest in the company and maintained an office there 3 days a week. The second call was to Diana Winters, forwarding her the realtor's message as further evidence. The third was to my sister, Kara, who had majored in finance before becoming a teacher and still maintained connections in Boston's financial world. "Gerald, it's Jennifer," I said when he answered, keeping my voice low to avoid waking Emma. "We need to talk immediately about Ryan, and I need your discretion until we meet." Gerald agreed to see me the following morning at his home in Brookline, his voice concerned but reserved. Unlike his son, Gerald Calloway had built his business on a foundation of integrity. What would he say when he learned what his son had done? While waiting for Emma's breakfast tray the next morning, a nurse handed me an envelope that had been delivered to the hospital reception. Inside was a formal letter from Ryan's lawyer, outlining a proposed divorce settlement that offered me our family home, which I later discovered had a second mortgage I knew nothing about, and a monthly support payment that was less than a third of our daughter's private school tuition. There was no mention of the emptied trust funds. The letter stated Ryan would be generous with visitation rights once he settled into his new situation. My hands didn't shake this time. I tucked the letter into my bag, kissed Emma's forehead after explaining I had an important meeting but would be back soon, and took a rideshare to the Calloway estate where Gerald and Martha had lived for 40 years. Martha, Ryan's mother, greeted me with a warm hug, her face lined with concern. "Jennifer, what's happening? Gerald's been upset since your call, and we haven't heard from Ryan in days." "I think it's better if I explain everything at once," I replied, following her into Gerald's wood-paneled study where the 72-year-old patriarch of the Calloway family waited, his expression grave. For the next hour, I laid out everything. The emptied trust funds, the Michigan property, the affair with Vanessa, the abandonment during Emma's illness, and the insulting divorce settlement offer. I provided bank statements, showed them Meredith's photo, and forwarded the realtor's message to Gerald's phone. The elder Calloways sat in stunned silence when I finished. Then Gerald stood, his hands shaking with a rage I'd never witnessed, in the typically composed businessman. "I did not build this company, this legacy, for this," he said, his voice low but intense. I did not teach my son to steal from his children's future. Martha wiped tears from her eyes. Those poor girls. Emma in the hospital, and he's... She couldn't finish the sentence. Gerald moved to his desk, picked up his phone, and made a call. Marcus, emergency board meeting, 3 o'clock today. Every voting member must attend. He looked at me. Jennifer, can your sister stay with Emma for a few hours this afternoon? When I nodded, he continued. Then I need you at that meeting. What Ryan has done. It's not just a family matter. There are serious questions about judgment and ethics that the board needs to address immediately. As Gerald drove us to the Callaway Financial offices in downtown Boston, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He explained that the company bylaws included a morality clause for all C-suite executives. It was my father's idea, actually. He lost everything in a business partnership with his brother-in-law who turned out to be embezzling. He believed financial management required unimpeachable character. I had never attended a board meeting at Callaway Financial, despite being married to the COO for 15 years. Ryan had always kept his work and home lives separate, claiming it was cleaner that way. Now I understood why. The boardroom fell silent when Gerald and I entered. 8 people sat around the large oval table, including Marcus Chen, the company's legal counsel, and Patricia Wells, the CFO who had always been cordial but distant at company events. This is an emergency session of the Callaway Financial Board, Gerald began without preamble. My daughter-in-law Jennifer has brought to my attention actions by Ryan Callaway that constitute violations of our company's ethical standards and potentially legal violations as well. For the next 30 minutes, I again shared everything, this time with supporting documentation provided to each board member in folders prepared by Gerald's assistant. As I spoke, I watched their expressions shift from confusion to disbelief to anger. "Where is Ryan now?" Patricia asked when I finished. "According to his cousin in Chicago with his assistant Vanessa Parker," I replied. "He's not responding to calls or texts, even about our daughter's hospitalization." Marcus Chen cleared his throat. "Gerald, given the evidence presented and Ryan's current unavailability, I recommend invoking Section 7(3) of the bylaws for immediate suspension of duties, pending full investigation." Gerald nodded grimly. "I second the motion." The vote was unanimous. Within an hour, Ryan Callaway was suspended from all duties at Callaway Financial, his access to company accounts revoked, and an internal audit of all his business activities initiated. As the meeting concluded, Gerald asked me to remain behind with him, Patricia, and Marcus. "Jennifer," Gerald said once the others had left, "there's another matter to discuss. Ryan was overseeing the Thompson portfolio merger, a $40 million deal scheduled to close next week. Without him, we're potentially exposed." Patricia interjected. "The client specifically requested Ryan's personal involvement. We risk losing the entire account if we can't provide continuity." I listened, unsure why they were sharing this with me, until Gerald continued. "You have an MBA from Boston University with a focus on sustainable investment strategies. You've served on the boards of 3 substantial nonprofits, and you know this deal. Ryan may not have realized it, but Martha mentioned you helped him prepare his presentation materials." My mind raced, remembering the late nights helping Ryan organize his slide deck, suggesting improvements to his approach based on the Thompsons' interest in environmental impact investing, work he had presented as entirely his own. "Are you suggesting?" I couldn't even finish the question. "I'm suggesting we need someone who understands the Thompson priorities and has the qualifications to step in immediately," Gerald said. "Initially as a consultant, but potentially in a more permanent capacity, depending on how things unfold." The offer stunned me. After years of putting my career second to Ryan's, after believing my business education was now just an expensive memory, I was being offered a chance to step into a significant role at one of Boston's most respected financial firms. The twins, I began, thinking of Emma in the hospital. We'll arrange for flexible hours initially, Patricia said, surprising me with her supportiveness. I raised 3 kids while building my career here. Gerald has always ensured this company accommodates family priorities, a policy your husband unfortunately didn't seem to value. As I left the Callaway financial offices that afternoon to return to Emma's hospital bedside, my mind was spinning with the day's developments. The devastation of Ryan's betrayal remained, but alongside it grew something unexpected, a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in years. That evening, as I sat beside Emma's bed helping her with the science homework she insisted on completing despite her illness, my phone lit up with a text from Ryan, the first contact since his disappearance. Heard about the board meeting. This is completely inappropriate. You had no right to involve my family or the company in our private matters. I'll be consulting my attorney about your interference in my professional affairs. I showed the message to Diana during our call later that night. He still doesn't know about the trust funds, she observed. He thinks this is about the affair, or the divorce. Should I respond? I asked. Not yet, she advised. Let him reveal more about his position. Meanwhile, we've filed emergency motions regarding the misappropriated trust funds, and I've contacted authorities about potential financial fraud charges. The next morning brought Emma's release from the hospital and an unexpected visitor to our home, Martha Callaway, carrying homemade soup and a determined expression. The girls shouldn't suffer for their father's poor choices, she stated, settling into our kitchen as if preparing for battle. Gerald and I have discussed it, and we'd like to immediately establish new trust funds for Emma and Lily's education. Not alone, Jennifer, she added when I began to protest. A promise we made to our granddaughters the day they were born. Ryan's actions don't change that. Tears filled my eyes at the gesture, which would ensure the twins' educational future, regardless of what happened with the legal proceedings against Ryan. Martha hugged me fiercely. And we're so proud of you for stepping in with the Thompson account, she added. Gerald said your insights during yesterday's emergency strategy session were exactly what they needed. A week passed in a blur of activity. Emma recovered steadily. The girls returned to school, and I divided my time between caring for them and working at Callaway Financial, where I quickly proved my value by identifying key elements of the Thompson portfolio that Ryan had overlooked. The clients responded positively to my approach, particularly my emphasis on sustainable investment opportunities that aligned with their values. Ryan, meanwhile, returned to Boston without Vanessa, attempting to regain access to his office only, to be turned away by security. His lawyer reached out to the board, threatening litigation for wrongful termination, but the company's position remained firm, supported by evidence of Ryan's ethical violations and abandonment of responsibilities. The defining moment came 10 days after my initial discovery of the emptied accounts. I was meeting with the Thompson family to finalize their portfolio strategy when Ryan burst into the conference room, clearly not expecting to find me there. "What is she doing here?" he demanded, staring at me in disbelief before addressing the clients. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I apologize for the confusion. I'm Ryan Callaway, your account manager." Mrs. Thompson, a formidable woman in her 60s, regarded him coolly. "We're aware of who you are, Mr. Callaway. We're also aware that you're currently suspended from duties at this firm. Mrs. Callaway has been managing our transition quite capably." "This is ridiculous," Ryan sputtered, his carefully cultivated, professional demeanor cracking. "She's my wife, not a financial advisor. Whatever she's told you?" "She told us that the sustainable energy fund she identified outperformed market expectations by 17% last quarter," Mr. Thompson interrupted. "And she showed us how reallocating from your suggested traditional energy holdings would have cost us significant returns given recent regulatory changes. Ryan's face flushed as security arrived to escort him from the building. As he was led away, he looked back at me, finally seeing me, perhaps for the first time in years, not as his supportive wife or the mother of his children, but as someone capable of taking what he had discarded and making it into something better. The Thompson portfolio closed successfully 3 days later, bringing a significant commission to Callaway Financial and cementing my position within the firm. Gerald called me into his office after the papers were signed. "Jennifer," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "The board has been discussing the company's future leadership. Ryan's actions have created a significant vacancy, one that needs to be filled by someone who understands both our business model and our values." I listened, hardly daring to believe where this conversation was heading. "We'd like to offer you a permanent position as Director of Sustainable Investment Strategies, with a path to becoming Chief Investment Officer within 2 years if performance metrics are met." The offer included not just a substantial salary and benefits package, but also equity in the firm, a stake in the Callaway legacy that would ultimately benefit Emma and Lily far more than the trust funds Ryan had stolen. That evening, as I helped the twins with homework at our kitchen table, my phone buzzed with an email from Diana. Ryan had finally responded to the legal motions regarding the misappropriated funds. His lawyer was proposing a settlement that would return 60% of the money taken from the trust funds, contingent upon the company dropping its internal investigation. "What should I do?" I asked Diana when I called her after the girls were asleep. "We counter," she said firmly. "Full restoration of the trust funds, plus damages. The criminal investigation proceeds regardless. That's not something you can stop now anyway. And Jennifer, you're negotiating from a position of strength now." She was right. In just 2 weeks, I had gone from devastated wife to valued executive. The company that bore Ryan's family name now looked to me for leadership. The clients he had cultivated now preferred my investment approach. And most importantly, the daughters whose future he had attempted to steal were now watching their mother build something new from the ashes of his betrayal. 3 months later, as I sat in the newly renovated office that had once been Ryan's, reviewing quarterly projections with Patricia, my assistant notified me that the final paperwork had been filed in both the divorce and criminal proceedings. Ryan had accepted a plea deal that required full financial restitution, community service, and probation. The Michigan property had been sold, with proceeds directed to replenishing the twins' trust funds. Vanessa had left the state, apparently unwilling to stand by Ryan once his financial prospects dimmed. That night, as Emma and Lily chatted excitedly over dinner about their school's upcoming science fair and art exhibition, I realized that Ryan's betrayal, painful as it was, had ultimately led me back to myself, to the ambitious, capable woman who had once dreamed of making her mark in the financial world while creating positive change. "Mom, are you listening?" Lily asked, waving her hand in front of my face. "I said I want to do my art project on women leaders in business. Could I maybe interview you and some of the people at your company?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "And I need help with my science project on sustainable energy investment. Patricia said you're the expert now?" I smiled at my daughters, seeing in them the resilience and strength they had inherited, not from the father who had abandoned them, but from a mother who had discovered that betrayal wasn't the end of her story, but rather the beginning of a better one. "Yes," I told them, my voice steady with the confidence I had reclaimed. "I think I can help with that." The morning after the Thompson deal closed, I woke before my alarm, my mind already racing with plans for the day ahead. Soft, early light filtered through the curtains as I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake the twins who had crawled in beside me sometime during the night, a habit they'd developed since Ryan's departure. Despite the chaos of recent weeks, there was comfort in these quiet moments. Emma's gentle snoring and Lily's arm flung dramatically across the pillows. I padded downstairs to make coffee, mentally reviewing the presentation I needed to finalize for the executive committee meeting. The kitchen still bore traces of Ryan, the espresso machine he'd insisted on importing from Italy, the pretentious wine rack built into the cabinetry, but it was increasingly becoming mine. I'd replaced his austere black and white artwork with the girls' colorful paintings and moved the furniture to better suit our new routines. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Check your email. New information about Ryan's accounts." The coffee forgotten, I opened my laptop at the kitchen island and logged into my email. Patricia had forwarded a message from Marcus Chen containing preliminary findings from the forensic accountants investigating Ryan's financial activities. What I read made my stomach drop. The missing trust fund money was just the beginning. Ryan had apparently been operating a separate set of books for several key client accounts, skimming investment returns and manipulating performance reports. The discrepancies dated back at least 3 years and potentially affected dozens of clients, including the Thompsons. I called Patricia immediately. "How bad is this?" "Bad enough that the SEC will get involved," she replied, her usually composed voice tight with stress. "Gerald's on his way to the office now. Emergency executive meeting at 7:30. After arranging for my sister to take the girls to school, I dressed quickly and headed downtown, my mind spinning with implications. This wasn't just about my family anymore. Ryan's actions threatened the entire company, a firm that employed over 200 people and managed retirement funds for thousands of clients. The executive conference room was already full when I arrived. Gerald sat at the head of the table, looking a decade older than he had the day before. Patricia stood by the whiteboard, marker in hand, while Marcus Chen distributed thick folders to everyone present. "Jennifer," Gerald nodded as I took a seat. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Marcus cleared his throat. "As everyone now knows, our internal audit has uncovered significant irregularities in accounts managed directly by Ryan Calloway. This goes beyond personal ethical violations and enters the territory of potential securities fraud." For the next hour, we reviewed the devastation Ryan had left in his wake. He had created a sophisticated system of diverting small percentages from high-performing accounts. Never enough to raise immediate concerns, but accumulating to substantial amounts over time. Most troubling was his manipulation of performance. Reports, which had systematically overstated returns to certain clients while understating them to others, creating a false balancing act that had somehow escaped routine audits. "The Thompsons?" I asked, dreading the answer. Patricia grimaced. "Their actual returns were approximately 2% lower than reported over the past 2 years. My heart sank. I had just signed them to a major new agreement based partly on trust in the firm's past performance that had been artificially inflated. "We have 3 immediate priorities," Gerald announced, his voice finding its strength again. "First, we need to fully quantify the damage and identify every affected client. Second, we need a containment and communication strategy. And third, we need to prepare for regulatory scrutiny." Patricia added, "And we need to determine if anyone else was involved. Ryan couldn't have done all this alone, not with our compliance systems." All eyes turned to Martha Calloway, who had just entered the room. As the company's former compliance officer before her semi-retirement, she had designed many of the systems Ryan had somehow circumvented. "I've been reviewing the audit logs since Marcus called me last night," she said without preamble. Ryan's executive override was used to approve exceptions in the reporting system. But there are secondary approvals from another user account, Vanessa Parker's. The executive assistant. Of course. She would have had access to Ryan's calendar, communications, and potentially even his passwords. Their affair suddenly took on new dimensions, not just a personal betrayal, but a professional conspiracy. "We need to contact the authorities," Marcus said firmly. "Before this goes any further, we need to demonstrate that the company is being proactive in addressing the fraud." Gerald nodded, his expression grave. "Jennifer, I need to ask something difficult. given your position as both a family member and now a key executive, would you be willing to be the liaison with the SEC investigation team? No one understands both the personal and professional dimensions of this situation better than you. The request stunned me. Becoming the face of the company's response to my own husband's fraud seemed like an impossible position. Yet I also recognized the strategic wisdom. Who better to demonstrate the firm's commitment to transparency and accountability than the person most personally betrayed? "I'll do it," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "But I'll need complete access to everything. No compartmentalization, no protected information. If I'm going to represent the company to regulators, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with." The meeting continued with assignments distributed and crisis teams formed. By noon, we had drafted initial communications to potentially affected clients and prepared documentation for the SEC. The company's outside counsel had been engaged, and a specialized crisis management firm was on standby. As the room cleared, Gerald asked me to stay behind. Once we were alone, his professional facade crumbled slightly. "I keep asking myself how I missed this," he said, staring out the window at the Boston skyline. My own son. Was I so blinded by family loyalty that I failed to see what was happening in my own company? I recognized the guilt in his voice. It echoed my own questions about how I had missed the signs in my marriage. "Ryan fooled all of us, Gerald. He was deliberately deceptive in every aspect of his life." Gerald turned to face me, his eyes suddenly sharp. "There's something else you should know. The preliminary forensic accounting suggests he's been moving money offshore, accounts in the Cayman Islands, property purchases in the names of shell companies. The trust funds and the Michigan property may be just what we can see on the surface." My blood ran cold. "You think he has a contingency plan?" "I think my son has been planning his exit for years," Gerald confirmed. "The affair with Vanessa, the fraud schemes, they're all part of something bigger, and I'm concerned about what else we haven't discovered yet." As I drove home that evening, Gerald's warnings echoed in my mind. If Ryan had indeed been orchestrating a long-term exit strategy, what else might he have put in motion? The thought was interrupted by a call from Diana Winters, my attorney. "Jennifer, we've received a response to our emergency motion regarding the trust funds. The judge has frozen all of Ryan's known domestic accounts pending the hearing next week." "That's good news," I said, pulling into my garage. "There's more. Ryan's attorney has filed a counter motion claiming that you've engaged in a hostile takeover of his position at the family company, constituting financial duress. He's asking for emergency spousal support." I nearly laughed at the audacity. "He steals our children's college funds and then claims I'm causing him financial hardship?" "It gets worse," Diana continued. "He's also seeking shared custody of the twins, claiming your new executive position leaves you insufficient time to care for them properly." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Using the children as leverage, it was low even for Ryan. He hasn't even called them since he left. Emma was in the hospital, and he didn't even send a text to ask how she was doing. "It's a negotiation tactic," Diana assured me. "He's trying to create bargaining chips. The custody claim is particularly transparent given his recent behavior." After ending the call, I sat in my car for several minutes, gathering my composure before facing the twins. Ryan was escalating, using every available tool to undermine me personally and professionally. The man I had once loved, who had held my hand through 36 hours of labor, was now weaponizing our children in a desperate attempt to save himself. Inside, I found Emma and Lily at the kitchen table with my sister, working on homework. Their faces brightened when they saw me, momentarily easing the knot of anxiety in my chest. "Mom, I got an A on my science project proposal," Emma announced, waving a paper with her teacher's enthusiastic comments. "And Ms. Collins picked my drawing for the school art show," Lily added, not to be outdone. I hugged them both, breathing in The scent of their shampoo and the lingering trace of the chocolate chip cookies they'd clearly been snacking on. I'm so proud of you both. Let me change, and you can tell me all about your day over dinner. Kara followed me upstairs, concern evident in her expression. Tough day? Ryan's attorney filed for custody, I said quietly, changing into jeans and a sweater. He's claiming my new job makes me an unsuitable parent. My sister's face darkened. That's rich coming from the man who drained their college funds and skipped town with his assistant while Emma was in the hospital. He's desperate, I replied, though the custody filing had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. The company discovered he's been running a much larger fraud scheme. The SEC will be involved. Kara's eyes widened. Jesus, Jen, this is getting more complicated by the day. Tell me about it, I sighed, heading back downstairs to where my daughters waited, blissfully unaware of the gathering storm. That night, after the girls were asleep, I created a detailed timeline of every event, conversation, and discovery since Ryan's disappearance. If I was going to fight effectively on multiple fronts, the company crisis, the SEC investigation, the divorce proceedings, and now a custody battle, I needed absolute clarity on how events had unfolded. I was still working when my phone rang just after midnight. The caller ID showed Gerald's number. Jennifer, I apologize for the late hour, he began, his voice tight. But there's been a development. The Harbor Springs police just called. The lakefront property Ryan was purchasing, there was a fire tonight. Authorities are calling it suspicious. Was anyone hurt? I asked, immediately thinking of Vanessa. No, the house was empty. But Jennifer, according to the real estate agent, Ryan had scheduled a final walkthrough tomorrow. He was planning to be there. The implication was clear. If Ryan had indeed been planning to visit the property, the fire's timing wasn't coincidental. Insurance fraud? I suggested. Possibly, Gerald agreed, or destroying evidence. Either way, it confirms my suspicion that we're still only seeing pieces of a larger scheme. Sleep eluded me that night as I considered the escalating situation. Ryan had gone from a cheating husband to a financial criminal to potentially something far more dangerous. The man I had married, the father of my children, had become unrecognizable, a stranger capable of calculated destruction. Morning brought another shock. As I prepared breakfast for the twins, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Callaway Financial. Facing potential fraud investigation. Sources say millions affected. The story had broken. I immediately called Patricia, who confirmed my fears. Someone leaked information to the financial press. We're implementing the crisis communication. Plan now. Gerald asks that you come in immediately. We need to make a public statement before the markets open. The girls, I began. Bring them, Patricia said, understanding immediately. We've set up a small activity room down the hall from the conference center. Several executives are bringing their children today given the all-hands situation. By 8 a.m., the Callaway Financial offices had transformed into a command center for crisis management. The public relations team drafted statements, the legal department prepared regulatory filings, and account managers called priority clients. The twins settled into the hastily arranged children's area with tablets, books, and art supplies, supervised by the HR director's college-age daughter. In the main conference room, Gerald addressed the assembled leadership team. We will be absolutely transparent about what happened and completely clear about who was responsible. This company has built a 40-year reputation on integrity, and we will not let the actions of one person, even my son, destroy that legacy. As Gerald outlined the company's response strategy, my phone lit up with a call from Diana. Stepping into the hallway, I answered quickly. Jennifer, Ryan's attorney just filed an emergency motion requesting that the court prohibit you from making any public statements about Ryan in your capacity at Callaway Financial. They're claiming you have a conflict of interest and are attempting. to damage his reputation to gain advantage in the divorce proceedings. The timing is unbelievable, I said, watching through the glass as the crisis team continued their planning. The story just broke this morning. Which suggests Ryan knew it was coming, Diana observed. He's trying to silence you specifically because he knows you're the most credible voice against him. I returned to the conference room, sharing this latest development with Gerald and Marcus. The company's general counsel frowned deeply. This complicates our communication strategy. We were planning to have Jennifer address key clients directly because of her unique perspective. Gerald shook his head. We need to fight this motion immediately. If Ryan can prevent Jennifer from speaking in her professional capacity, he creates doubt about the company's narrative. It's a strategic move to undermine our credibility with clients and regulators. Marcus nodded. I'll work with Diana to prepare our response. In the meantime, we should proceed with the planned statements, but have Patricia deliver them instead of Jennifer. As the meeting adjourned and executives dispersed to their assignments, I checked on the twins before heading to my office. They had made friends with 2 other children and were happily engaged in a complex art project involving an alarming amount of glitter. In my office, I found Martha Calloway waiting, a stack of file folders on her lap and a determined expression on her face. I've been reviewing historical compliance exceptions, she said without preamble, looking for patterns that might have escaped notice. Jennifer, I found something concerning. She opened the top folder, revealing a series of override logs, dating back 5 years. Ryan's unusual account activities didn't begin 3 years ago as we initially thought. There are irregularities going back to when Gerald first made him COO. I studied the documents, recognizing the implications. This wasn't opportunistic. It was systematic from the moment he gained executive authority. Martha nodded grimly. And there's more. I identified 6 client accounts that show similar patterns but aren't directly tied to Ryan. They're officially managed by different advisors, but the exception patterns match his methodology exactly. Accomplices? I asked, thinking immediately of Vanessa. Or puppets, Martha suggested. Junior advisors Ryan might have influenced or pressured. This expanded the scope of the investigation significantly. If Ryan had recruited others into his schemes, the company's exposure was potentially much greater than we had initially assessed. We need to bring this to Gerald and Marcus immediately, I said, gathering the folders. Martha placed her hand on mine, stopping me. Jennifer, one of these accounts is managed by Harold Winters. That's Diana's husband, I finished, the implications hitting me instantly. My own divorce attorney's husband might be implicated in Ryan's fraud schemes. The potential conflict of interest was enormous. Are you certain? I asked, examining the documents more closely. The pattern is identical, Martha confirmed. I can't say definitively that Harold was knowingly involved, but his client accounts show the same manipulation signatures as Ryan's. This complicated everything. Diana had been my advocate, my guidance through the darkest days of this crisis. The thought that her husband might be connected to Ryan's schemes created a new dimension of betrayal. I need to speak with Diana, I said, reaching for my phone. Martha nodded. I understand, but Jennifer, be careful. We don't know how deep this goes or who else might be involved. The warning chilled me. If Ryan had indeed built a network of accomplices within the firm, who could I truly trust? Gerald and Martha had proven their loyalty, as had Patricia. But how many others in the company might have divided loyalties? I called Diana, asking her to meet me privately rather than discussing the matter over the phone. She agreed to come to the office immediately, sensing the urgency in my voice. While waiting, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. Not everyone at CF is who they appear to be. Check the Artemis account activity from last October. A friend. The cryptic message sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. I searched the company database for Artemis and found a large institutional client, a pension fund for a teachers' union. The account was managed by a team led by Samuel Reed, a senior advisor who had been with the company for nearly 2 decades. Pulling up the account activity for October of the previous year, I noticed nothing immediately suspicious. The statements showed normal trading patterns, standard fee structures, and typical performance metrics. What was I missing? I dug deeper, examining the underlying transaction logs rather than the summary statements. There, a series of bond trades executed on October 17th showed an unusual pattern. The bonds had been purchased at one price in the morning, transferred between sub-accounts around noon, and then sold at a higher price in the afternoon. The transfers had effectively hidden a substantial markup that benefited neither the client nor the firm officially, but created a float of nearly $400,000 that was temporarily unaccounted for. Where had that money gone during the hours it was in limbo? And who was a friend who had pointed me toward this specific transaction? Diana arrived before I could investigate further. She looked harried, her usually impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. "Jennifer, what's so urgent that it couldn't wait? I was preparing our response to Ryan's motion to silence you." I closed my office door and handed her Martha's folder. "Diana, I need to ask you something difficult. How much do you know about your husband's client accounts?" Her expression shifted from confusion to wariness. "Harold and I maintain strict professional boundaries. I don't discuss my cases with him, and he doesn't share client information with me." "Why?" "Because his name has come up in our internal investigation," I said gently. "There are patterns in his account management that mirror Ryan's fraudulent activities." The color drained from Diana's face as she examined the documents. "This isn't possible. Harold is meticulous, ethical to a fault." "Could Ryan have manipulated Harold's accounts without his knowledge?" I suggested, offering a potential explanation that wouldn't implicate her husband directly. Diana looked up, her professional composure reasserting itself. "I need to recuse myself from your case immediately. This creates an irreconcilable conflict of interest." She stood, gathering her belongings. "I'll recommend several excellent attorneys who can take over your divorce and custody proceedings." "Diana, wait," I began, but she shook her head. "Jennifer, I can't discuss this further with you. I need to speak with my husband and potentially my own counsel." Her voice softened slightly. "For what it's worth, I believe in your case. Don't let Ryan win." After she left, I sat in stunned silence. Another ally lost, another complication in an already Byzantine situation. The text message about the Artemis account weighed on my mind. Who had sent it, and what else did they know? I forwarded the message and my findings about the Artemis account to Marcus Chen, asking him to include it in the expanding investigation. Then I turned my attention to the immediate crisis: the court hearing on Ryan's motion to prevent me from speaking publicly about the fraud in my capacity as a company executive. The hearing was scheduled for 3 p.m. that afternoon, remarkably fast, suggesting Ryan's attorney had pulled strings to expedite the process. With Diana's recusal, I would be represented by Alice Hernandez, a partner from Diana's firm who specialized in high-conflict divorce cases with financial complications. We met briefly before the hearing, Alice quickly reviewing the case files. Diana had transferred to her. "His motion is overreaching," she assured me. "He's attempting to use family court to silence you in a professional capacity, which extends beyond the court's typical jurisdiction." The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that buzzed faintly overhead. Ryan's attorney, Gregory Phillips, was already seated at one table, surrounded by assistants and paperwork. There was no sign of Ryan himself. "Your Honor," Phillips began once the proceedings were underway, "my client is facing a coordinated attack on his personal and professional reputation by his estranged wife, who has insinuated herself into his family's company during a vulnerable period and is now using that position to gain unfair advantage in divorce proceedings. Judge Caroline Mills, a veteran family court judge with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, raised an eyebrow. Counselor, are you suggesting that Mrs. Calloway's employment at Callaway Financial is inappropriate in some way? We're suggesting that her dual role creates an inherent conflict of interest, Phillips replied, smoothly. She cannot simultaneously serve as a company executive publicly addressing alleged financial improprieties and as a divorcing spouse seeking maximum financial benefit from those same allegations. Alice rose, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Phillips's theatrical presentation. Your Honor, the motion before you today represents an unprecedented attempt to use family court to silence legitimate corporate communications. Mrs. Calloway's employment at Callaway Financial predates any knowledge of Mr. Calloway's alleged financial misconduct. Her role in the company's response to that misconduct is based on her professional qualifications, not her marital status. The arguments continued for nearly an hour, with Phillips presenting increasingly dramatic characterizations of my vindictive campaign against Ryan, while Alice methodically dismantled each claim with references to precedent and statute. Finally, Judge Mills held up her hand. I've heard enough. This court does not have the authority to restrict Mrs. Calloway's professional communications in her capacity as an executive at Callaway Financial. However, she added, fixing me with a stern look, I will caution all parties that statements made with demonstrable intent to influence these proceedings outside the courtroom will be viewed unfavorably by this court. The motion is denied. Relief washed over me as Alice squeezed my hand under the table. Ryan's attempt to silence me had failed, for now. But as we gathered our materials to leave, Phillips approached. This isn't over, he said quietly. My client is prepared to demonstrate that your position at the company was obtained under false pretenses as part of a coordinated effort with Gerald Callaway to deprive Mr. Callaway of his rightful position and assets. Alice stepped between us? Save it for your next motion, counselor. We'll be ready. Outside the courthouse, as we waited for our respective ride shares, Alice's expression turned serious. Jennifer, I need to ask, is there anything in how you obtained your position at Callaway Financial that could be characterized as inappropriate or orchestrated specifically to harm Ryan? Absolutely not, I replied firmly. Gerald offered me the position based on my qualifications and the urgent need created by Ryan's abandonment of his responsibilities. There was no conspiracy. Alice nodded. Good, because Phillips wouldn't have made that threat without something he thinks he can use. Ryan is planning his next move, and we need to be prepared. As my car arrived, Alice promised to begin preparing for the custody hearing scheduled for the following week. The thought of facing Ryan over the custody of our daughters filled me with dread, but also strengthened my resolve. He had stolen their financial security and abandoned them during a crisis. I would not allow him to use them as pawns in his desperate attempt to save himself. Back at the office, I found Gerald in my doorway, his expression unreadable. I heard the motion was denied, he said simply. For now, I confirmed. But Ryan's attorney made it clear they're planning to attack my position here next, claiming we conspired to push Ryan out. Gerald snorted. Ryan pushed himself out when he started defrauding clients. He entered the office fully, closing the door behind him. Jennifer, the forensic accountants have made another discovery. Those offshore accounts we suspected, they're real, and they're substantial. Ryan has transferred approximately $3.8 million to various entities in the Cayman Islands over the past 4 years. The figure staggered me. That's far more than just the trust funds. It represents the accumulated proceeds of his various schemes, Gerald confirmed. But here's what's concerning. Most of the transfers were completed months ago. The recent trust fund theft was just the final withdrawal before his planned exit. I considered the implications. So the affair with Vanessa, the Michigan property, even emptying the trust funds, these weren't impulsive acts triggered by a midlife crisis. They were the final steps in a long-planned exit strategy. Exactly, Gerald said grimly. And that raises a disturbing question. If Ryan has been planning this for years, what triggered him to accelerate his timeline now? What changed that? Made him rush the final stages of his plan? It was a question that would haunt me for weeks to come. What had Ryan known that prompted him to make his move when he did? And more importantly, what else was coming that we hadn't yet discovered? As Gerald left, my phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. The Artemis account was just the beginning. Ryan wasn't working alone. Watch Patricia Wells carefully. A friend, Patricia, the CFO who had been so supportive, who had helped integrate me into the company, who was currently leading our crisis response efforts. Could she be involved in Ryan's schemes? The thought was almost too devastating to contemplate. I stared at the message, feeling the ground shift beneath me once again. Just when I thought I understood the scope of Ryan's betrayal, new dimensions emerged, expanding the circle of potential conspirators and deepening the web of deception. One thing was becoming increasingly clear. This wasn't just about a failed marriage or even financial fraud. This was about a systemic conspiracy that threatened everything: the company, my professional reputation, my personal finances, and potentially even custody of my children. As I gathered the twins from the activity room, their faces bright with excitement about their day, I made a silent vow. Whatever Ryan and his potential accomplices had planned, whatever was still hidden beneath the surface of his schemes, I would uncover it all. Not just for my sake, or for the company's, but for Emma and Lily, two innocent children whose futures had been gambled with by the very person who should have protected them most fiercely. The battle lines were drawn, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Ryan had spent years building his exit strategy. Now I would dismantle it piece by piece, no matter who else was implicated in the process. The text about Patricia Wells haunted me throughout the evening as I made dinner for the twins, helped with homework, and went through our bedtime routine. The possibility that the CFO, a woman who had seemingly taken me under her wing, might be complicit in Ryan's schemes created a new level of isolation. If I couldn't trust Patricia, who at the company could I trust? After tucking Emma and Lily into bed, I sat at my kitchen island with a glass of wine and my laptop, determined to find answers. The anonymous texter had pointed me toward the Artemis account, and that tip had proven accurate. Could their warning about Patricia be equally valid? I needed evidence before making accusations that could further destabilize the already fragile company. I logged into the Callaway financial system remotely, using the executive access Gerald had granted me. My first target was Patricia's electronic calendar. If she was working with Ryan, there might be patterns of meetings or interactions that seemed suspicious in retrospect. Scanning backward through months of appointments, I noticed nothing immediately alarming until I reached the period about 8 months ago, around the time Martha's compliance logs had shown an acceleration in Ryan's fraudulent activities. Patricia had a recurring bi-weekly meeting simply labeled Investment Strategy Review, with no attendees listed. The meetings were always scheduled for 7 a.m., before most staff arrived, and took place in one of the small conference rooms without video recording capabilities. Was this significant, or simply a private working session? I couldn't be certain, but the timing aligned suspiciously with the escalation of Ryan's schemes. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Alice Hernandez. Jennifer, I've been reviewing the financial disclosures Ryan's team finally provided today, she said without preamble. Something doesn't add up. He's claiming significant personal debt and limited assets, despite his executive compensation package and what we know about those offshore accounts. He's hiding money, I replied, unsurprised. The forensic accountants found transfers to the Caymans totaling almost $4 million. That explains it. Alice said. But here's what's strange. His listed expenses include large monthly payments to a company called Meridian Consulting, nearly $30,000 a month for the past year. I frowned, making a note. I've never heard of them. What kind of consulting? The disclosure doesn't specify, just lists it as professional services, Alice replied. I'll have my team look into it, but I thought you might ask around at Callaway Financial to see if Meridian is a known vendor. After ending the call, I searched the company's vendor database for Meridian Consulting. No results. Next, I checked the approved vendor list maintained by the procurement department. Again, nothing. Meridian was receiving substantial payments from Ryan personally, but had no official relationship with the company. I performed a general internet search for Meridian Consulting, finding dozens of companies with similar names spread across various industries and locations. Without more specific information, it was impossible to identify which might be receiving Ryan's payments. Another text arrived from my anonymous informant. Meridian Consulting is Patricia's company, registered in her maiden name, Parker, Delaware Corporation, 2018. My breath caught. Patricia's maiden name was Parker. Could she have established a shell company to receive payments from Ryan? And if so, for what purpose? The pieces were starting to align in a disturbing pattern, but I still lacked definitive proof. I searched Delaware's business registry, finding Meridian Consulting LLC registered to a Patricia Parker in 2018. The listed address was a mail forwarding service in Wilmington. No other officers or directors were named. With mounting unease, I called Gerald despite the late hour. "I'm sorry to disturb you," I began when he answered, "but I've discovered something concerning about Patricia." I outlined my findings, the suspicious meeting pattern, the Meridian Consulting connection, and the anonymous tips that had proven accurate so far. Gerald was silent for a long moment after I finished. "This is troubling," he finally said. "Patricia has been with the company for 15 years. She helped build our compliance systems, which would give her intimate knowledge of how to circumvent them," I pointed out gently. "We need to proceed carefully," Gerald cautioned. "If Patricia is involved, confronting her prematurely could give her time to cover her tracks or even warn others we haven't identified yet. If she's innocent, accusing her would damage a key relationship during our most vulnerable period." We agreed that Marcus Chen would quietly begin investigating Meridian Consulting and Patricia's potential connection to Ryan's schemes, while I would continue to work closely with her, watching for any signs that confirmed or refuted my suspicions. The next morning brought a development that temporarily overshadowed the Patricia question. As I arrived at the office, Martha was waiting by my door, her expression grave. "Jennifer, Ryan has surfaced." "What do you mean?" I asked, unlocking my office. "We've known where he is. His attorney was in court yesterday." Martha followed me inside, closing the door firmly behind her. "He's given an interview to the Wall Street Journal. It's publishing online within the hour and will be in tomorrow's print edition." My stomach dropped. "What kind of interview?" "He's positioning himself as a whistleblower," Martha said, her voice tight with anger, claiming he discovered financial irregularities at the company and was forced out when he threatened to expose them. He's painting Gerald as the mastermind of a decades-long fraud scheme. The audacity was breathtaking. Ryan was attempting to rewrite the narrative completely, casting himself as the hero and his victims as the villains. "Does Gerald know?" I asked, already reaching for my phone. Martha nodded. "He's on his way in. Crisis team is assembling now." Within 15 minutes, the executive conference room had filled with the company's leadership team, outside counsel, and crisis communications consultants. Gerald stood at the head of the table, looking every one of his 72 years, but with a fire in his eyes I hadn't seen before. "My son," he began, his voice steady despite the circumstances, "has chosen to compound his crimes with slander. He believes that by attacking first, he can create enough doubt to mitigate his own guilt. Marcus Chen cleared his throat. The legal implications are significant. By making these claims publicly, Ryan has potentially opened himself to defamation suits. However, he's likely calculated that the damage to the company's reputation will be immediate and substantial, regardless of the legal outcome. Patricia spoke next, her face a mask of professional concern. We need to prepare our clients for this. Many will have questions about the competing narratives. Some may choose to withdraw their funds out of an abundance of caution. I watched her carefully as she spoke, searching for any hint that she might be complicit in Ryan's schemes. Was her apparent distress genuine, or was she playing a role while secretly coordinating with Ryan? Nothing in her demeanor suggested deception, but then nothing in Ryan's had either, until it was too late. The crisis team quickly developed a multi-pronged response strategy. A formal statement rebutting Ryan's claims, one-on-one calls with major clients from Gerald personally, accelerating the release of the forensic accounting findings, and preparing documentation for media outlets showing the timeline of Ryan's fraudulent activities. As the meeting concluded, Gerald asked Patricia and me to stay behind. Once the room had cleared, he fixed Patricia with a direct gaze. Patricia, I need to ask you something directly, and I need an honest answer. Do you have any connection to a company called Meridian Consulting? The color drained from her face, but her voice remained steady. Yes, it's a private consulting practice I established several years ago, primarily for tax purposes related to some family property holdings. It's disclosed in my annual conflict of interest statements. Gerald's expression remained neutral. And have you ever received payments from Ryan through this company? Now Patricia's composure faltered slightly. Not directly from Ryan, no. The company was hired for a special project analyzing acquisition targets. The contract came through the business development department, which Ryan oversaw. How much? I asked quietly. Patricia hesitated. The initial contract was for $150,000 over 6 months. It was extended twice. Gerald exchanged a glance with me before continuing. And did you perform actual consulting work for these payments? Of course, Patricia replied, an edge entering her voice. I compiled detailed analysis reports on potential acquisition targets in the sustainable energy sector. Everything is documented. I can provide copies of all the work product. Please do, Gerald said, immediately. And Patricia, if there's anything else connecting you to Ryan's activities that we should know about, now is the time to disclose it. Once the Wall Street Journal article breaks, everything will be scrutinized. Patricia stood, straightening her jacket with hands that trembled slightly. Gerald, I've given 20 years of my life to this company. I've made sacrifices for Callaway Financial that cost me my marriage and time with my children. I would never jeopardize the firm's reputation or my own integrity. Ryan may have used my consulting company in ways I wasn't aware of, but I am not his accomplice. After she left, Gerald turned to me. What do you think? I think we need to see those consulting reports, I replied carefully. The timing and circumstances are suspicious, but she seemed genuinely shocked by the implication. We'll know more soon, Gerald agreed. In the meantime, we need to prepare for the public fallout from Ryan's interview. The Wall Street Journal article was even worse than anticipated. Ryan portrayed himself as a concerned executive who had discovered significant financial irregularities in accounts directly managed by my father, and claimed he had been planning to report these findings to the SEC when Gerald orchestrated my removal from the company. He suggested that my sudden elevation within the firm was part of a calculated strategy to discredit him, implying that I had traded my silence about Gerald's alleged misconduct for professional advancement. The article sent shockwaves through Boston's financial community. By noon, several major clients had called demanding explanations, and the company's stock had dropped 8%. The twins' school called to inform me that reporters had been seen near campus, prompting them to increase security measures. In the midst of the chaos, Alice called with news about the custody hearing. Ryan's attorney has submitted the Wall Street Journal article as supplemental evidence, she informed me. They're arguing that your involvement in a company facing serious fraud allegations creates an unstable environment for the children. That's absurd, I protested. Ryan is the one who committed fraud and abandoned his family. It's a perception. Game, Alice explained patiently. They're trying to create enough doubt and confusion that the judge might opt for a more conservative custody arrangement until the financial matters are resolved. We need character witnesses who can speak to your parenting and to the girls' well-being in your care. I immediately thought of the twins' teachers, my sister Kara and Martha Calloway, who had seen firsthand how I balanced my responsibilities as both a mother and an executive during the crisis. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of crisis management. Gerald issued a powerful statement refuting Ryan's claims, backed by preliminary findings from the forensic accountants. I spent hours on calls with key clients, walking them through the evidence of Ryan's misconduct while providing assurances about the company's stability and integrity. By market close, our stock had recovered slightly, suggesting that at least some investors believed our version of events over Ryan's. That evening, as I drove home exhausted but determined, my phone rang with a call from an unlisted number. Expecting another client or perhaps a reporter, I was startled to hear Vanessa Parker's voice. "Jennifer, please don't hang up," she began, hurriedly. "I know you have every reason to hate me, but I have information you need." I pulled into a grocery store parking lot, my heart racing. "I'm listening." "Ryan is lying about everything," Vanessa said, her voice low as if she feared being overheard. "He orchestrated the fraud schemes himself, including the ones he's now trying to blame on Gerald. I helped him falsify documents, reroute transfers, and cover his tracks." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, suspicious of her sudden attack of conscience. "Because he's planning to leave the country," she replied. "He has a private flight booked to Grand Cayman tomorrow night. Once he's there, he'll move the hidden assets again and disappear for good." The information aligned with what we already suspected about Ryan's exit strategy, but hearing it confirmed by his accomplice made it suddenly more urgent. "Why should I believe you?" I pressed. "You've been his partner in all of this." Vanessa laughed bitterly. "His partner? I was his tool, just like you were. He promised we would start a new life together, that we'd split everything 50-50. Then yesterday, I discovered he's been moving money to accounts I don't have access to. He's planning to abandon me just like he abandoned you and the girls." Self-interest, not remorse, had motivated her call. Still, the information could be valuable if accurate. "Do you have proof of any of this?" I asked. "I have everything," Vanessa replied. "Account numbers, transfer records, emails discussing the fraud schemes, even recordings of conversations where Ryan explicitly discussed framing Gerald if he ever got caught. I was his executive assistant. He trusted me with everything." "And what do you want in exchange for this evidence?" I asked, knowing there would be a price. "Immunity," she said simply. "I'll cooperate fully with authorities, turn over every piece of evidence, and testify against Ryan. In return, I want a written agreement that I won't be prosecuted." I called Marcus Chen immediately after ending the call with Vanessa. As the company's general counsel, he would coordinate with the appropriate authorities regarding any immunity agreement. "This could be the break we need," Marcus said after I relayed the conversation. With Vanessa's testimony and evidence, we could definitively refute Ryan's claims against Gerald and the company. But we need to move quickly if he's really planning to flee tomorrow. Marcus promised to contact the SEC and FBI immediately, while I called Gerald to update him on the development. By the time I arrived home, a plan was in motion. Vanessa would meet with federal agents the following morning to provide her evidence and formal statement. In return, prosecutors would consider a cooperation agreement that might mitigate her criminal exposure, though full immunity was unlikely given her admitted role in the schemes. The twins were already asleep when I arrived home, having been fed and put to bed by Kara. My sister waited up, concern evident in her expression as I collapsed onto the sofa beside her. "You look like you've been through a war," she observed, handing me a glass of wine. "Multiple fronts, multiple enemies, and I'm still not entirely sure who's on which side," I replied, taking a grateful sip. "Any news about the custody hearing?" Kara asked. "It's scheduled for Thursday," I said. "Alice thinks Ryan's using the Wall Street Journal article to paint me as an unsuitable parent because of my involvement with a scandal-plagued company." Kara snorted. "The scandal he created himself. The man has no shame." "He has nothing left to lose," I corrected her. "His reputation is destroyed. His criminal exposure is substantial, and now even Vanessa has turned against him. The only leverage he has left is the girls." "He doesn't care about them," Kara said bluntly. "He hasn't even called them since he left. This is just another way to hurt you." Though harsh, her assessment aligned with my own growing conviction. Ryan wasn't fighting for custody because he wanted to be an active father. He was using the threat of taking the girls as a negotiating tactic, hoping I would agree to favorable financial terms, or perhaps even drop the fraud allegations in exchange for him abandoning his custody claims. The next morning, I took the twins to school myself, wanting to spend some extra time with them before the tumultuous day ahead. As we pulled up to the drop-off line, Emma turned to me with a serious expression. "Mom, Tyler Reynolds said his dad told him that our dad is in trouble for stealing money. Is that true?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Despite my efforts to shield them from the uglier aspects of Ryan's betrayal, the outside world was intruding. Other parents were discussing the Wall Street Journal article, and inevitably, their children were picking up fragments of the adult conversations. I put the car in park and turned to face both girls. "Your father made some very poor choices at his company," I said carefully, honoring my commitment to age-appropriate honesty without burdening them with details they couldn't process. "There are people investigating those choices now." "Is that why he hasn't called us?" Lily asked, her voice small. "Because he's in trouble?" "I don't know why he hasn't called," I answered truthfully. "That's a choice he's making that has nothing to do with how special and lovable you both are." Emma's face hardened in a way that reminded me painfully of her father. "If he took money, that didn't belong to him, that's stealing. Mrs. Davis says stealing is always wrong." "Mrs. Davis is right," I agreed, watching my daughter process this information with a maturity beyond her 12 years. "Then I don't want to talk to him anyway," Emma declared, unbuckling her seatbelt and reaching for her backpack. Lily followed her sister's lead, though her expression remained troubled. I watched them walk into the school building, their identical backpacks bouncing slightly with each step, and felt a renewed surge of determination. Whatever Ryan's next move, I would protect them, not just their financial future, but their emotional well-being and their understanding of right and wrong, in a world that had suddenly become far more complicated than it should be for children their age. At the office, the atmosphere was tense as we awaited news from Vanessa's meeting with federal authorities. Gerald had joined the investigators for the initial interview, hoping to immediately refute any claims she might make that aligned with Ryan's false narrative about his involvement. Patricia approached my office mid-morning, a thick binder in her arms. "These are all the consulting reports and analysis I completed for the business development department," she said, placing the binder on my desk. "Every acquisition target I evaluated, every recommendation I made, every financial model I created. It's all there." I thanked her, still uncertain whether to trust her completely, but impressed by the thoroughness of the documentation she had provided. "Jennifer," she added, lingering in the doorway. I know how this looks. The consulting arrangement, the payments, the timing, it all seems suspicious. But I need you to understand something. Ryan Calloway is a master manipulator. He creates structures and relationships that seem legitimate until you step back and see the larger pattern. What exactly are you saying, Patricia? She sighed, closing my office door and lowering her voice. I'm saying that in retrospect, I believe Ryan deliberately established the consulting relationship with my company to create exactly this kind of suspicion if he ever needed a distraction or a scapegoat. He insisted on the unusual payment structure and the confidentiality provisions. At the time, I attributed it to standard corporate politics. He didn't want other executives to know he was seeking outside analysis that might contradict their recommendations. The explanation was plausible, consistent with Ryan's methodical approach to creating leverage and contingency plans. If Patricia was telling the truth, it suggested a level of foresight and calculation on Ryan's part that was truly disturbing. I'll review these materials carefully, I promised. In the meantime, we need to prepare for whatever fallout comes from Vanessa's testimony today. Around noon, Gerald returned from the interview with federal authorities, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. Vanessa provided substantial evidence confirming Ryan's fraud schemes, he reported once we were alone in my office. Emails, recorded conversations, transfer records, enough to conclusively refute his claims against me and the company. That's good news, I said, noting his reserved tone. Isn't it? Gerald nodded slowly. Yes, but there were surprises as well. Vanessa revealed that Ryan has been developing an insurance policy against several key executives, collecting compromising information, identifying potential vulnerabilities, establishing financial connections that could appear suspicious under scrutiny. Like Patricia's consulting arrangement, I suggested. Exactly, Gerald confirmed. According to Vanessa, Ryan deliberately structured relationships with at least 4 executives in ways that would allow him to implicate them if necessary. Patricia was one. Samuel Reed was another. Samuel Reed, the manager of the Artemis, account my anonymous informant had directed me to investigate. The pieces were starting to align. Did Vanessa confirm that Ryan is planning to leave the country tonight? I asked. Yes. Private flight from a small airstrip outside the city, scheduled for 11 p.m., Gerald replied. The FBI is making arrangements to intercept him before he can board. The news should have brought relief, but instead, I felt a growing unease. Ryan had proven himself to be meticulous in his planning, always several steps ahead of those trying to catch up. Would he anticipate this interception just as he had prepared for other contingencies? My concerns were interrupted by an urgent call from the twins' school. Mrs. Calloway, this is Principal Winters. There's been an incident involving your daughters. My heart raced as I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. Are they hurt? No, they're physically fine, but a man claiming to be their uncle attempted to remove them from school during lunch period. When questioned by staff, he produced what appeared to be a notarized letter from you authorizing him to pick up the girls for a medical appointment. I didn't write any such letter, I said, already reaching for my keys. Who was this man? He identified himself as James Calloway, but when our security officer asked for identification, he quickly left the premises. We've contacted the police and the girls are in my office now. They didn't recognize the man. James Calloway. Ryan didn't have a brother named James, and Gerald's only son was Ryan himself. The attempted removal of my daughters from school by someone using a falsified authorization letter was clearly connected to Ryan's plans to leave the country. Had he intended to take the twins with him? I thanked the principal for their vigilance and promised to arrive within 15 minutes. As I hurried to my car, I called Alice to update her on this alarming development. Then Marcus to ensure the FBI was aware that Ryan might have expanded his escape plan to include the girls. The school had increased security by the time I arrived, with a police officer posted at the entrance and staff checking identification more carefully than usual. Emma and Lily were waiting in the principal's office, looking confused rather than frightened. "Mom, there was a weird mix-up," Emma explained as I hugged them both tightly. "Some man said he was supposed to take us to the dentist, but we don't even have a dentist appointment today." "And you didn't know him at all?" I asked, studying their faces carefully. Both girls shook their heads. "He said he was Uncle James, but we don't have an Uncle James," Lily added. "He knew our names, though." The principal showed me a copy of the forged authorization letter, which included a reasonable facsimile of my signature and detailed information about the girls' supposed dental appointment. The level of preparation was chilling. After thanking the school staff for their vigilance, I took the twins home, arranging for 2 off-duty police officers to provide security at our house. Kara arrived shortly after, having left her classroom, to a substitute teacher when I called with the news. "Ryan tried to kidnap them," she stated flatly once the girls were occupied with a movie in the family room. That's what this was. "We don't know it was Ryan directly," I cautioned, though I shared her suspicion. "But it was almost certainly connected to his plans to leave the country tonight." "You can't let him anywhere near them," Kara insisted. "Not even in a supervised visitation. The man is desperate and dangerous." I nodded, the reality of our situation settling like a weight on my shoulders. Ryan's betrayal had escalated from financial theft to attempted child abduction. Whatever lingering doubts I might have harbored about aggressively pursuing full custody with no visitation rights had evaporated. The twins' safety now clearly depended on Ryan having no access to them whatsoever. I called Alice immediately, forwarding her photos of the forged authorization letter and the school's incident report. She promised to file an emergency motion, restricting Ryan's access to the children pending the full custody hearing. As evening approached, my phone rang with a call from Marcus Chen. "Jennifer, the FBI just reported that Ryan wasn't at his apartment when they arrived to detain him. They've issued an alert to airport security and border patrol, but he knows," I finished the thought. "Somehow he found out about Vanessa's cooperation and adjusted his plans." "It appears so," Marcus confirmed. "They're searching for him now, but given the attempted removal of your daughters from school today, we recommend maximum caution. Is your home secure?" I assured him that we had hired security and that Kara would be staying overnight. After ending the call, I double-checked all doors and windows, set the alarm system, and tried to maintain a calm demeanor for the twins' sake despite my growing anxiety. Around 8 o'clock, as I was helping the girls get ready for bed, my phone lit up with a text from the now familiar anonymous number. "Ryan will try to reach the girls tonight. He has a contingency plan involving your neighbor's property. Extra security on your back fence line. Not police. Trust no one who can't verify identity with Martha directly. A friend." The warning sent a chill through me. I immediately called Gerald, who promised to send trusted company security personnel to supplement the officers already watching the house. Martha herself volunteered to come stay with us, providing an additional layer of identity verification for anyone claiming to be legitimate security. As the night wore on, with Martha and Kara taking turns keeping watch while I stayed close to the twins' bedroom, I couldn't help but reflect on how dramatically my life had changed in just a few weeks. From trusted wife and stay-at-home mother to corporate executive, and target of my husband's increasingly desperate machinations, the transformation was still difficult to fully comprehend. My phone buzzed again just after midnight, Gerald calling with news. "They've found him," he said, his voice tight with emotion. Ryan was apprehended trying to board a private helicopter at a farm property about 30 miles outside the city. He had modified identification documents, several phones, and a substantial amount of cash. Relief washed over me, though I knew this was just one battle in what would be a prolonged war. Ryan was in custody, but the damage he had caused to the company to our family, and to the trust that had once defined my world, remained. "There's something else," Gerald continued after a moment. "When they arrested him, Ryan had detailed information about your house, the twins' bedrooms, and your security system, Jennifer. I believe he really was planning to take the girls tonight." The confirmation of my worst fears sent a wave of nausea through me. Ryan had not only stolen our daughter's financial future, he had been prepared to steal their physical presence from their home, their school, their entire lives, all to serve his own desperate needs. I thanked Gerald for the update and went to check on Emma and Lily. They slept peacefully, unaware of how close they had come to being taken by the father who had already abandoned them emotionally. Watching their gentle breathing, I made another silent promise. They would never know how narrowly they had escaped, never bear the burden of understanding the full extent of their father's betrayal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the custody hearing, ongoing investigations, rebuilding the company's reputation, addressing client concerns. But for tonight, it was enough that they were safe, that Ryan's most immediate threat had been neutralized. As I settled into a chair between their beds, prepared to keep vigil until morning, my phone lit up with a final message from my anonymous informant. "You've won the first round. But Ryan's contingency plans have contingency plans. Stay vigilant. I'll be in touch when it's safe to reveal myself. A friend." The warning tempered my relief, reminding me that capturing Ryan didn't automatically dismantle the elaborate schemes he had constructed over years of deception. There would be more revelations, more battles, more difficult choices ahead. But for the first time since discovering the emptied trust funds, I felt something close to hope. Not just that we would survive this crisis, but that we might eventually find a way to thrive despite it, perhaps even because of it. Ryan had betrayed us, stolen from us, and attempted to destroy everything we had built together. In response, I had discovered strengths and capabilities I hadn't known I possessed. The company he had abandoned was now partly mine to shape. The daughters he had failed would have in me an example of resilience and integrity. The future he had tried to steal was still ours to reclaim. As dawn broke over Boston, casting long shadows across the twins' bedroom floor, I allowed myself a moment of quiet triumph. Ryan was in custody. The immediate danger had passed, and tomorrow I would walk into court not as a victim seeking justice, but as a mother and executive who had already begun to rewrite the story he had tried to dictate for us all. Ryan's arrest dominated the local news cycle by morning. The story had all the elements media outlets craved: wealth, betrayal, financial crime, and now a dramatic attempted escape foiled by federal agents. As I prepared the twins for school, carefully screening news stations and removing newspapers, from the driveway before they could see the headlines, I felt a strange disconnect. The man being described in breathless news reports as a financial predator and fugitive executive had once been the center of our family life. The father, who checked for monsters under beds and coached Lily's soccer team. "Mom, is Dad in jail?" Emma asked quietly as I packed her lunch. I froze, caught between the honesty I had promised myself I would maintain and my desire to protect them from painful realities. "Yes," I finally answered, turning to face her directly. "He's been arrested for some of the bad choices he made at work." Emma nodded, absorbing this information with the serious contemplation that had become her hallmark these past weeks. "Tyler's dad said he might go to prison for a long time." "That's possible," I acknowledged, silently cursing the playground rumor mill that was forcing these difficult conversations. The people who decide those things will look at everything he did before making that decision. Lily joined us in the kitchen. Catching the end of our conversation, "If Dad goes to prison, will we still have to see him for visits?" The question revealed their underlying anxiety, not whether Ryan would be punished, but whether they would be forced to maintain a relationship with him. It broke my heart that at 12 years old, my daughters were more concerned about mandatory visitation than about their father's freedom. That's something the judge will help decide at our court hearing today, I explained gently. But I promise you both that I will always listen to your feelings about this, and I will do everything I can to make sure you feel safe and comfortable. As we drove to school, now accompanied by a security guard Gerald had insisted on providing, until Ryan's full network of accomplices could be identified, I noticed both girls seemed lighter somehow. Ryan's arrest, while shocking, had removed a hovering uncertainty from their lives. The man who had abandoned them, who had tried to take them from their school, was now contained. The immediate threat had passed. After dropping them off, I headed directly to the courthouse for the custody hearing. Alice was waiting on the steps, looking confident in a navy suit that projected both authority and approachability, exactly the image we wanted to present to the family court. Ryan's being transported from federal custody for the hearing, she informed me as we walked inside. His attorney filed an emergency motion to postpone, citing his client's inability to prepare adequately while in detention, but Judge Mills denied it. In the courtroom, I was surprised to find Martha and Gerald already seated in the gallery, along with Kara and several of my closest friends. Their presence formed a stark contrast to Ryan's side of the room, which contained only his attorney and 2 junior associates from the same firm. No family, no friends, no character witnesses to speak to his parenting abilities or personal integrity. When Ryan was brought in, handcuffed and wearing an orange jumpsuit rather than his usual bespoke suits, I barely recognized him. Just weeks of separation had transformed him from the polished, confident man I had married into someone haggard and diminished. He avoided meeting my eyes, staring straight ahead as his attorney whispered urgently in his ear. Judge Mills called, the court to order, addressing the unusual circumstances directly. These proceedings will determine temporary custody arrangements for minor children Emma and Lily Calloway. I understand that the children's father, Ryan Calloway, is currently in federal custody awaiting arraignment on charges including wire, fraud, money laundering, and attempted child abduction. Mr. Phillips, does your client wish to proceed today, or would you prefer to withdraw your custody petition given these developments? Gregory Phillips rose, straightening his tie nervously. Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence regarding all criminal charges and wishes to proceed with his petition for joint custody. Mr. Calloway loves his daughters deeply and believes maintaining his relationship with them during this difficult time is in their best interest. The statement was so divorced from reality, from Ryan's months of planning his escape, his theft of the girls' education funds, his complete absence during Emma's hospitalization, and his attempt to remove them from school under false pretenses, that I had to stifle an incredulous laugh. Judge Mills turned to Alice. Ms. Hernandez, your response? Alice stood, her posture conveying quiet confidence. Your Honor, we are prepared to demonstrate that Mr. Calloway has systematically prioritized his own interests over his daughters' well-being, culminating in his attempt to abduct them as part of his planned flight from justice. We believe the evidence supports an immediate award of sole legal and physical custody to Mrs. Calloway, with no visitation rights for Mr. Calloway given the clear danger he poses to the children. What followed was a methodical dismantling of Ryan's parental claims. Alice presented evidence of his financial theft from the children's accounts, documented his complete absence during Emma's medical crisis, and highlighted the school's incident report regarding the attempted removal of the girls using falsified documents. Most devastating were the statements from the twins' teachers and school counselor, who testified to the emotional impact of Ryan's abandonment. Emma's science teacher described how she had burst into tears during a parent-child project day when another student's father had helped her with a difficult equation. Lily's art teacher shared drawings Lily had created in the weeks following Ryan's disappearance, family portraits where the father figure was systematically erased or blackened out. When it was Ryan's attorney's turn to present his case, he focused almost exclusively on my new role at Callaway Financial, suggesting that my executive responsibilities left me insufficient time for parenting and that the ongoing corporate scandal created an unstable and potentially traumatic environment for the children. Judge Mills listened attentively, making occasional notes before calling a brief recess to review the submitted materials. When she returned, her expression was somber but resolved. Having reviewed the evidence presented by both parties, I find that Mr. Callaway has demonstrated a pattern of behavior that prioritizes his personal interests over his children's well-being, culminating in actions that place them at significant risk of harm. His current incarceration and the serious nature of the charges against him, particularly the attempted abduction, raise profound concerns about the children's safety in his presence. She turned to address Ryan directly. Mr. Callaway, this court's primary obligation is to protect the best interests of your daughters. The evidence overwhelmingly suggests that those interests are not served by maintaining your parental rights at this time. Judge Mills then issued her ruling. I would receive sole legal and physical custody of Emma and Lily. Ryan would have no visitation rights, supervised or otherwise, until the criminal charges against him were resolved. Even then, any future visitation would require both court approval and the children's consent, given their ages and the nature of his offenses against them. As we left the courtroom, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the girls were legally protected from Ryan's machinations, sadness for what our family had lost, and lingering anxiety about the road ahead. The custody battle had been won, but the larger war, securing the company's future, rebuilding our financial security, and helping the twins heal from their father's betrayal, was far from over. Gerald and Martha waited for me outside, both offering warm embraces that conveyed their support more eloquently than words could have. Thank you for being here today, I said, genuinely moved by their presence. You didn't have to do that. Of course we did, Martha replied firmly. You and the girls are family. Ryan's actions don't change that. Gerald nodded in agreement, though his expression remained troubled. Jennifer, there's been a development at the company we need to discuss. Not here, though. Can you come to the office after you've had some time to process the hearing? The urgency in his tone concerned me. I can come now. Kara's picking up the girls from school today, and I'd planned to work this afternoon anyway. In Gerald's private office, with Martha and Marcus Chen present, I learned the reason for their concern. The forensic accountants had completed their preliminary analysis of the full scope of Ryan's fraudulent activities, and the impact was significantly worse than initially estimated. The total client exposure is approximately $28 million, Marcus explained, sliding a detailed report across Gerald's desk. Ryan's manipulations affected over 60 client accounts, with the largest impacts concentrated among 8 institutional investors. The number was staggering, far beyond the $38 million Ryan had transferred to offshore accounts. Where did the rest of the money go? I asked, struggling to comprehend the scale of the fraud. That's what's concerning, Gerald replied, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose wearily. We can only account for about $14 million in Ryan's personal accounts, property investments, and known expenses. The remaining funds seem to have vanished. Martha leaned forward, tapping a particular section of the report. There's a pattern of transfers to a series of shell companies that the forensic team hasn't been able to fully trace yet. The complexity suggests Ryan wasn't working alone on this larger scheme. Vanessa? I suggested, thinking of Ryan's assistant and accomplice. Marcus shook his head. Based on her cooperation with federal investigators so far, Vanessa was involved primarily in the documentation and cover-up aspects. She helped Ryan manipulate reports and conceal the fraud, but she claims to have limited knowledge of where the bulk of the money went. She's identified 2 other employees who assisted Ryan with various aspects of the scheme, but neither appears senior enough to be the mastermind behind something this sophisticated. I thought of the anonymous texts I had received, warning me about Patricia Wells and pointing me toward specific accounts that had proven significant to the investigation. What's Patricia's involvement in all this? Have we confirmed whether her consulting arrangement with Ryan was legitimate? Gerald exchanged glances with Marcus before responding. The forensic team has reviewed all the documentation Patricia provided. The consulting work appears genuine. Detailed reports, substantive analysis, legitimate recommendations. However, the payment structure was unusual, with significant bonuses tied to outcomes that weren't clearly defined in the contract. So it could have been a sophisticated way to funnel money to her, I suggested, or a legitimate consulting arrangement with deliberately ambiguous compensation terms that Ryan could later use to cast suspicion on her if needed, Martha countered. Remember what Vanessa told federal investigators? Ryan created insurance policies against several executives by establishing relationships that could appear suspicious under scrutiny. The uncertainty was maddening. After weeks of revelations and investigations, we still couldn't definitively identify all the players in Ryan's schemes or locate the full extent of the misappropriated funds. Meanwhile, clients were growing, increasingly concerned about the security of their investments, and regulatory scrutiny intensified daily. What's our next step? I asked, my mind already working through potential strategies. Gerald's response surprised me. The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Given the extent of the fraud and the potential liability, they're considering a range of options, including a potential sale of the company. A sale? I repeated, stunned by the suggestion. But Callaway Financial has been independent for 40 years. It's your legacy. Gerald smiled sadly. A legacy my son has now tainted irrevocably. The reality is that the fraud may have damaged our reputation beyond repair. Several major clients have already indicated they're considering moving their assets to other firms. The regulatory fines alone could be crippling. There must be alternatives, I protested, thinking of the employees whose livelihoods depended on the company's survival, including myself. My newly established career and financial independence were directly tied to Callaway Financial's continuation. There are, Marcus acknowledged, but all involve significant restructuring, potential layoffs, and a long road to rebuilding client trust. The board needs to weigh the viability of those options against the certainty of a sale that would at least preserve some value for shareholders. Gerald leaned back in his chair, looking suddenly every one of his 72 years. Jennifer, I wanted you to hear this from us directly, not in the board meeting tomorrow. Whatever happens with the company, Martha and I want you to know that our support for you and the girls is unwavering. The financial commitments we've made to replacing the twins' education funds stand regardless of the company's fate. The assurance was touching, but did little to ease the new anxiety building within me. Callaway Financial's potential sale or restructuring introduced yet another layer of uncertainty to our already precarious situation. If I lost my executive position in a corporate reorganization, I would need to quickly find another source of income to support the girls. As I drove home that evening, my mind raced with contingency plans. My MBA and new executive experience would be valuable in the job market, but the taint of the Callaway scandal might make immediate employment challenging. We could downsize from our current home, reducing expenses until I established a new career path. The girls' private school tuition would be covered by the trust funds Martha and Gerald had established, but other expenses would need careful management. Lost in these calculations, I almost missed the car that had been following me since I left the office. It was a nondescript sedan, maintaining a consistent distance through several turns. Normally, I might have dismissed it as coincidence, but Ryan's arrest and the mystery of his missing accomplices had heightened my vigilance. I called the security guard stationed at our home, describing the vehicle and asking him to be alert for any unusual activity. Then I varied my route, making several random turns to confirm my suspicion. The sedan followed each deviation, maintaining its measured distance without attempting to close the gap. Rather than leading this unknown pursuer to my house, I made a split-second decision to drive to the nearest police station. As I pulled into the brightly lit parking lot, the sedan continued past without slowing, disappearing around the corner. Shaken, I filed a brief report with the desk sergeant, who promised to have patrol cars make additional passes by my home that evening. When I finally arrived home, the security guard conducted a thorough check of the property before allowing me inside, where Kara waited with the twins. "Everything okay?" my sister asked, noting my tension despite my attempt to appear normal for the girls' sake. "Just a long day," I replied, forcing a smile. "How was school, you two?" Emma and Lily launched into animated accounts of their day. Science experiment involving baking soda volcanoes, a new art project focused on self-portraits, the latest drama in their friend group's complex social hierarchy. The mundane normalcy of their chatter was comforting, a reminder that despite the adult chaos swirling around them, they were still fundamentally children with children's concerns. After dinner and homework, with the twins settled in their rooms for the night, I finally shared the day's developments with Kara. The outcome of the custody hearing, the expanded fraud investigation findings, the potential sale of Callaway, financial, and the car that had followed me home. "You need to be careful, Jen," Kara warned, her expression grave. "Ryan might be in custody, but he clearly wasn't working alone. If there's still missing money that someone else helped hide, you could be seen as a threat to whoever has it now." "I know," I acknowledged, "but I can't hide in fear. The girls need stability, normalcy, and I need to be at that board meeting tomorrow. My future depends on what happens to the company." Kara stayed overnight again, both of us finding comfort in having another adult in the house given the circumstances. After she retired to the guest room, I sat alone in the kitchen, reviewing documents for the board meeting while periodically checking the security system displays that showed our property's perimeter. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with another text from my anonymous informant. "Tomorrow's board meeting is a trap. Sovereign Partners' acquisition offer is connected to Ryan's missing money. Check the offshore banking connections before you vote. A friend." Sovereign Partners. I recognized the name from acquisition rumors that had circulated periodically throughout the industry. They were a private equity firm known for buying distressed financial services companies, stripping them down, and reselling the pieces at a profit. Were they somehow connected to Ryan's fraud? I immediately forwarded the text to Marcus Chen, asking if Sovereign Partners had indeed submitted an acquisition offer and requesting any information he could find about their ownership structure and banking relationships. Despite the late hour, he responded within minutes, confirming that Sovereign was one of 3 potential buyers who had expressed interest and promising to have his team investigate their financial connections before the morning meeting. Sleep eluded me as I pondered the implications of this latest message. If Sovereign Partners was somehow connected to Ryan's schemes, their acquisition offer might be an attempt to bury evidence of the fraud within a larger corporate transaction. But how could I prove such a connection, especially in time for the board meeting just hours away? I decided to conduct my own research, using the executive access to company systems Gerald had granted me. Financial institutions maintained detailed records of correspondent banking relationships, the connections between banks that facilitated international transfers. If Ryan had moved money offshore, those transactions would have passed through. Specific pathways that might connect to Sovereign Partners or its principals. Hours of painstaking analysis revealed a pattern. Several of the shell companies that had received transfers from accounts Ryan controlled shared the same offshore banking facilities as subsidiaries of Sovereign Partners. It wasn't definitive proof of collusion, but it established a concerning pattern that warranted further investigation before any acquisition offer could be seriously considered. By dawn, I had compiled my findings into a concise presentation, emailing it to Gerald, Martha, and Marcus with a request to discuss before the board meeting. I showered and dressed carefully, selecting a structured charcoal suit that projected both confidence and gravity, appropriate for what promised to be a pivotal day in Callaway Financial's history. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the company's main conference room. I arrived early, hoping to connect with Gerald and Marcus beforehand, but found the room already filling with board members, legal counsel, and representatives from the potential acquiring firms, including 3 executives from Sovereign Partners. Gerald caught my eye across the room, discreetly motioning me to join him in his adjoining private office. Martha and Marcus were already waiting there, reviewing the materials I had sent. "Jennifer, this is remarkable work," Marcus said by way of greeting. "Our team has been investigating potential connections since you texted last night, but you've identified patterns we missed entirely." Gerald looked both impressed and concerned. "If these connections are substantiated, it suggests a level of coordination that goes well beyond what we've attributed to Ryan so far. Sovereign Partners may have been the intended destination for Callaway Financial all along." "A long con," Martha suggested. "Use Ryan to systematically defraud clients and weaken the company from within, creating the conditions for a distressed sale to a predetermined buyer who's already received a portion of the stolen funds." The theory aligned with the evidence, but still left crucial questions unanswered. Who within Sovereign Partners would have orchestrated such a scheme? And more importantly for the immediate situation, how could we convince the board to reject their acquisition offer without definitive proof of wrongdoing? Marcus addressed the practical concern directly. "We don't have enough evidence yet to make direct accusations against Sovereign Partners. Doing so without proof could expose the company to defamation claims. But we can certainly recommend postponing any acquisition decision pending further investigation of all potential buyers." Gerald nodded in agreement. "I'll open the meeting by addressing the expanded fraud findings, then suggest a cooling-off period before any ownership decisions are made. Jennifer, would you be willing to present your analysis of the correspondent banking patterns? Not directly accusing Sovereign, but raising legitimate due diligence concerns?" I agreed, quickly reformatting my presentation to emphasize the patterns, without making explicit accusations. As we prepared to rejoin the board meeting, Martha placed a hand on my arm, holding me back momentarily. "Jennifer, you should know, there's been discussion among some board members about creating a separate asset management entity that would operate independently from Callaway Financial's main business. If that option gains traction, your role as head of sustainable investment strategies would be secure, possibly even expanded." The information was both reassuring and concerning. While it suggested my professional position might survive the company's restructuring, it also indicated that plans were already being developed without my input, despite my now holding equity in the firm. The board meeting began with Gerald's somber overview of the fraud investigation's latest findings. The scope of Ryan's schemes and the extent of client exposure clearly shocked many board members who had believed the situation was more contained. When Gerald suggested postponing any acquisition decision until the full extent of the fraud could be determined, representatives from the potential acquiring firms objected strenuously. "With all due respect, Mr. Callaway," said Howard Reeves, Sovereign Partners' lead negotiator, "delaying a decision only extends the period of uncertainty for your clients and employees. Our offer provides immediate stability and liquidity during an extremely challenging time for your company." Other board members seemed swayed by this argument, noting the accelerating client withdrawals and the potential for a regulatory shutdown if the situation deteriorated further. The momentum seemed to be shifting toward an immediate sale. When Gerald called on me to present my analysis of the offshore banking connections, I felt the weight of the moment intensely. This wasn't just about preserving my job or even the company's independence. It was about preventing what appeared to be the final stage of a sophisticated financial crime. I began methodically, establishing the pattern of transfers from accounts Ryan controlled to various shell companies, then demonstrating the shared banking relationships between those shell companies and Sovereign Partners' subsidiaries. Without directly accusing Sovereign of complicity, I raised pointed questions about the statistical improbability of such overlapping financial pathways occurring by chance. As I spoke, I noticed Howard Reeves becoming increasingly agitated, whispering urgently to his colleagues and sending rapid texts on his phone. When I concluded my presentation, he immediately demanded the floor. "This presentation is riddled with speculative connections and innuendo," he declared, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Correspondent banking relationships are common in global finance. Finding patterns in those relationships is like finding shapes in clouds. You see what you're looking for. Sovereign Partners categorically rejects any implication of impropriety in our business dealings." The board seemed uncertain, caught between the concrete offer of stability Sovereign provided and the troubling patterns I had identified. The discussion grew heated, with board members dividing into factions supporting immediate sale versus continued independence pending further investigation. In the midst of this debate, Marcus received a message on his tablet that caused him to request an immediate 15-minute recess. Once granted, he quickly gathered Gerald, Martha, and me in Gerald's office, his expression a mixture of shock and vindication. "The FBI just raided Sovereign Partners' New York offices," he announced, without preamble. Apparently, Vanessa Parker provided additional information overnight that established direct communication between Ryan and Howard Reeves dating back 18 months. Gerald's eyes widened. "So our theory was correct. Sovereign was the intended destination all along." "It appears so," Marcus confirmed. "The FBI has requested that we not disclose the raid to the Sovereign representatives until they've secured all relevant documents, but this development obviously impacts our board's decision-making process." When the board reconvened, Gerald announced only that new information had come to light that required postponing any acquisition decision for at least 72 hours. The Sovereign Partners team objected vehemently, with Howard Reeves going so far as to suggest that their offer would be withdrawn if not accepted immediately. "That's your prerogative, Mr. Reeves," Gerald replied calmly. "But this board has a fiduciary duty to fully investigate all aspects of potential transactions, particularly given the unique circumstances we're facing." As the meeting adjourned with no decision reached, I noticed Howard Reeves making a hasty exit, phone pressed to his ear. Within hours, news of the FBI raid on Sovereign Partners would become public, vindicating our caution and raising new questions about the full extent of the conspiracy Ryan had participated in. That evening, as I recounted the day's dramatic developments to Kara while the twins completed their homework in the next room, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something, intuition or perhaps just the momentum of recent revelations, prompted me to answer. "Jennifer Calloway?" asked a woman's voice I didn't recognize. "Yes. Who's this?" "My name is Elaine Morgan. You don't know me, but I believe we have a mutual connection. I'm the one who's been texting you information about Ryan's schemes." My anonymous informant, finally revealing herself. "Why are you helping me?" I asked directly. Her laugh held no humor. "Because 4 years ago, I was you. Different name, different circumstances, but the same story in essentials. Ryan Calloway, except he called himself Ryan Carroll then, married me, gained access to my family's business, and systematically looted it before disappearing with millions." The revelation stunned me into momentary silence. Ryan had other victims before us, just as Vanessa had claimed. But this was different. Not just financial fraud against clients, but personal betrayal of another wife. "Are you saying Ryan was married before?" I finally managed. "Briefly," Elaine confirmed. just long enough to execute his scheme against my family's commercial real estate business. When I began asking questions about financial discrepancies, he vanished, along with about $12 million. By the time we understood what had happened, he had established himself in Boston with a new identity. "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" I asked, trying to process this new dimension of Ryan's deception. "I did," she replied, an edge of bitterness entering her voice. "But Ryan was careful. He had my signature on everything, made it appear that I was complicit. Fighting him would have meant potential criminal exposure for myself and my father. We made the calculation that rebuilding was better than a protracted legal battle we might lose." "But now you're coming forward," I observed. "Why?" "Because he's finally vulnerable," Elaine said simply. "Between your evidence and the federal investigation, there's a real chance of justice this time. I've been following his career from a distance for years, watching for an opportunity. When news broke about the fraud at Callaway Financial, I knew his pattern was repeating." Her story explained so much: the detailed knowledge of Ryan's methods, the specific guidance about which accounts to investigate, the warnings about his escape attempts. Elaine Morgan had the perspective of someone who had already experienced Ryan's betrayal and had studied his techniques in the aftermath. "I have documentation," she continued, "records of his previous identity, the transfers he orchestrated, even photos from our brief marriage. I've already shared everything with the FBI, but I thought you deserved to hear it directly from me. You're not his first victim, Jennifer, and if he somehow escapes justice again, you won't be his last." As I ended the call with a promise to meet Elaine in person soon, I felt strangely liberated by this final piece of the puzzle. Ryan's betrayal hadn't been about me, about our marriage, or even about our family. It had been about opportunity, the opportunity Callaway Financial represented, the access my trust provided, the cover our seemingly perfect family life offered for his true activities. The personal dimension of his deception, the affairs, the lies, the abandonment, had been merely tactical, means to an end rather than emotional failings or midlife crises. Understanding this didn't erase the pain, but it reframed it in a way that felt oddly empowering. I hadn't failed as a wife. I had simply been targeted by a practiced predator. As I checked on the sleeping twins one last time before bed, I felt a sense of clarity emerging from the chaos of recent weeks. Ryan had spent years executing an elaborate scheme to defraud Callaway Financial and orchestrate its sale to co-conspirators. He had used our marriage, our family, and even our children as components of his cover story, discarding us the moment our utility ended. But his plan had failed. Instead of destroying the company from within and disappearing with millions, he was in federal custody, facing multiple criminal charges. Instead of leaving me financially devastated and professionally adrift, he had inadvertently provided the catalyst for my own career renaissance. And instead of traumatizing the twins through a protracted custody battle, he had provided such clear evidence of his unfitness as a parent that the court had swiftly removed him from their lives. The road ahead remained challenging. Callaway Financial faced difficult restructuring decisions, client relationships needed rebuilding, and the full extent of Ryan's conspiracy with sovereign partners was still being unraveled. The twins would need ongoing support to process their father's betrayal and absence. My own healing journey was just beginning. But as I finally drifted toward sleep, I felt something I hadn't experienced since first discovering the Emptied trust: funds, genuine optimism about our future. Ryan had attempted to destroy everything we had built together, but in doing so, he had inadvertently revealed strengths and capabilities in me that might otherwise have remained dormant. The greatest revenge wasn't taking over his position at the family business. It was discovering that I was more than capable of succeeding where he had failed, both professionally and as a parent. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Another board meeting, ongoing investigations, the continuing process of rebuilding our lives. But for the first time, I felt truly confident in my ability to face whatever came next. Not as Ryan Calloway's betrayed wife, but as Jennifer Calloway, executive, and mother, architect of her own destiny. 1 year later, I stood at the podium in the newly renovated conference center of what was now called Callaway Morgan Investments. The name change had been my idea, incorporating Elaine Morgan's family name as a symbol of redemption and recognition for all of Ryan's victims. Elaine herself sat in the front row, now heading our risk management division, her financial expertise and first-hand experience with fraud making her uniquely qualified for the role. Today marks not just the first anniversary of our restructuring, I began, addressing the gathered employees, clients, and press representatives, but a celebration of resilience, transparency, and renewed purpose. The journey to this moment had been arduous. After the FBI raid on Sovereign Partners revealed the extent of the conspiracy, a coordinated effort to weaken Callaway Financial through internal fraud and then acquire it at a fraction of its value, the board had rejected all acquisition offers in favor of an independent restructuring. The company had been divided into two separate entities: a smaller wealth management firm focused on existing client relationships, and a new sustainable investment division that would build on the work I had started with the Thompson portfolio. Gerald had retired as planned, though he remained chairman emeritus and a valued advisor. I now served as CEO of the Sustainable Investment Division, while Patricia Wells, fully cleared of any wrongdoing in Ryan's schemes, led the traditional wealth management arm. What had initially seemed like a devastating fracture had evolved into a strategic specialization that allowed each division to thrive according to its strengths. When we faced our darkest hour, I continued, we made a choice that defined our future. Instead of hiding from the truth of what had happened, we embraced radical transparency. Instead of looking for quick exits, we committed to the harder path of rebuilding trust, relationship by relationship. That transparency had been costly initially. When we publicly disclosed the full extent of Ryan's fraud and the broader conspiracy with Sovereign Partners, several major clients had immediately withdrawn their assets. Regulatory fines had totaled nearly $7 million. We had been forced to reduce staff by 20% and impose temporary salary reductions for all remaining executives, myself included. But the gamble on honesty had eventually paid off. As the federal case against Ryan, Howard Reeves, and their co-conspirators made headlines, our forthright approach drew positive attention. New clients, particularly those interested in ethical investment strategies, began to seek us out specifically because of how we had handled the crisis. The Thompson family had not only remained with us, but had become our most vocal advocates, introducing us to their extensive network of like-minded investors. Today, I'm proud to announce that we have not only restored every dollar lost to client accounts during the fraud, but our sustainable investment portfolios have outperformed market indices by an average of 11% over the past year. The applause that followed reflected more than approval of our financial performance. It celebrated survival against the odds, vindication after months of public scrutiny and skepticism. Every person in the room had sacrificed to make this recovery possible, working longer hours, accepting reduced compensation, enduring the sidelong glances and whispered comments that came with being associated with a scandal-tainted firm. After the formal presentation, as guests mingled during the reception, Elaine approached me with 2 glasses of champagne. "To the Phoenix," she said, handing me one of the glasses. It had become our private toast, acknowledging the company's rise from the ashes of Ryan's betrayal. "I still can't believe we pulled it off," I admitted, taking a sip. "There were days I was certain we'd fail." "I never doubted," Elaine replied with the quiet confidence that had made her an invaluable ally during the restructuring. "You have something Ryan never understood: the ability to build rather than just take." Across the room, I spotted Emma and Lily with Martha, the 3 of them deep in conversation with a representative from the children's charity our company now supported. At 13, The twins had blossomed in ways that continually surprised me. Emma had discovered a passion for finance, frequently asking to shadow me at work and absorbing investment concepts with remarkable ease. Lily had channeled her artistic talents into graphic design, creating the new company logo that now adorned our headquarters. The changes in our personal lives had been as significant as the professional ones. We had sold the house with its painful memories and purchased a light-filled condominium closer to the office and the girls' school. The simplification had been liberating. Less space to maintain meant more time together, more freedom to focus on what truly mattered. Ryan's criminal trial had concluded 6 months earlier with a 17-year sentence for wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and attempted child abduction. Howard Reeves and 3 other Sovereign Partners executives had received similar sentences, while Vanessa had negotiated a 5-year term in exchange for her cooperation. The financial restitution ordered by the court had helped fund the repayment to defrauded clients, though much of Ryan's offshore money remained unrecovered. The twins had chosen not to attend any of the court proceedings. They had not spoken to or about their father since the day of his arrest. A silence that concerned me initially until their therapist assured me it was a normal protective mechanism. They would process their relationship with Ryan in their own time, in their own way. Gerald approached, leaning more heavily on his cane than he had a few months ago, but with the same sharp intelligence in his eyes. Quite a turnaround from last year, he observed, surveying the cheerful gathering. I'm proud of you, Jennifer. Taking a 40% pay cut to ensure no one in the lower ranks lost their jobs. That's the kind of leadership this company was built on. I learned from the best, I replied, genuinely grateful for his mentorship throughout the crisis and recovery. Besides, it was the right thing to do. We couldn't ask employees to believe in our future if we weren't willing to sacrifice for it ourselves. Speaking of the future, Gerald said, lowering his voice slightly. The board approved your proposal for the educational initiative. Full funding for the first 3 years. The news sent a wave of satisfaction through me. The Callaway Morgan Educational Foundation would provide college scholarships for children from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, with a special focus on students interested in ethical business practices and financial literacy. It represented everything Ryan had opposed, building opportunity rather than exploiting it, creating legitimate wealth rather than stealing it. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, I found myself standing with Martha in a quiet corner of the reception. I never thanked you properly, I said, suddenly aware of how crucial her support had been during the darkest days after Ryan's betrayal. You could have distanced yourself from me, protected the family name by keeping your distance from the scandal. Instead, you treated the twins and me as if nothing had changed. Martha squeezed my hand gently. Nothing important did change. Family isn't defined by the people who leave. It's defined by the people who stay, who show up day after day, who choose each other consistently. Her words crystallized something I had been feeling but hadn't fully articulated. Ryan's betrayal had shattered my conventional understanding of family, the nuclear unit I had believed was the foundation of our lives. But it had revealed a broader, stronger network of connections built on choice rather than obligation. Later that night, after the twins were asleep, I sat on our condo balcony overlooking the Boston skyline, reflecting on the journey of the past year. The pain of Ryan's betrayal had diminished, not through forgetting, but through the gradual shift in perspective that comes with distance and growth. What had once been a devastating personal rejection had transformed into a professional challenge to overcome, a puzzle to solve, a business to rebuild. My phone buzzed with a text from Alice Hernandez, who had become both my attorney and my friend. Just heard from the prosecutor. The Cayman's account has been located. Another $3 million recovered. Court will divide it between restitution to the company and the girls' trust funds. The news brought a smile, but not the surge of vindication I might have expected a year ago. Financial recovery, while important, felt almost secondary now to the less tangible gains of the past year. The strengthened relationship with the twins, the professional confidence I had developed, the network of authentic connections that had replaced the illusion of my marriage. I thought back to that moment in Diana Winter's office, staring at bank statements showing zero balances while processing the reality of Ryan's betrayal. The woman I had been then, shocked, frightened, uncertain of her future, would hardly recognize the person I had become. The crisis that was meant to destroy me had instead revealed a capacity for leadership, resilience, and reinvention I hadn't known I possessed. As I prepared for bed, I noticed Emma's notebook open on the kitchen counter, filled with her careful notes from our weekend discussion about compound interest and sustainable investment principles. Beside it lay Lily's sketchpad, containing preliminary designs for the Foundation's website. My daughters, once potential pawns in Ryan's desperate endgame, were now active participants in building something new and meaningful. That, ultimately, was the most profound revenge. Not just taking over Ryan's position at the family business, but transforming both the company and ourselves into something stronger, more authentic, and more purposeful than before. He had emptied our trust funds, believing it would leave us vulnerable and dependent. Instead, it had set us free to discover capabilities and connections that money could never buy and no betrayal could ever take away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: a meeting with potential international partners, budget discussions for the next fiscal year, Emma's science fair project, Lily's art showcase. But for tonight, I allowed myself to savor the quiet triumph of having not just survived Ryan's betrayal, but having used it as a catalyst for creating a life more meaningful than the one he had tried to destroy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.